welcome to our first episode of Empowered Social Justice podcast series. This podcast was created on behalf of Empowered Social Justice Committee to educate and raise awareness on different topics within social impact in education. We're your hosts for this episode. My name is Mira, and I am a junior at NYU.
My name's Ryan. I'm currently a senior at NYU. And today we'll like to introduce our first guest to this, this episode, Professor Hansen. He's currently a professor at NYU Stern in the Management Communications Department. He also leads Social Impact Scholars, which is a non-profit organization that offers consulting services to small and medium-sized enterprises. And they try to keep in mind at least one of UN's Sustainable Development Goals in their mission statements. Given his extensive experience in leading organizational changes in the private sector as well as the nonprofit sector, we thought he would be the perfect first guest for us to interview for this episode's theme of how can businesses be successful at creating social change.
So, Brian, we'd appreciate if you could introduce yourself to our audience a little bit and talk about how you became involved in Social Impact Scholars.
Sure, it's great to see you all. Thank you for having me. And Ryan both was in my Social Impact Scholars cohort, and he's been in at least one of my classes, so it's great to see you in this context. And I love being introduced by you. It's kind of fun. Anyway, I will tell you the really short answer to all of that is, a couple of years ago, I realized that the tides have really changed for college freshmen, especially at places like Stern, where more and more of my students were like part of the finance society in high school, or they were like learning about consulting when they were in the 11th grade of high school again. And then there were other students who came in and had absolutely no idea what any of these things were. And there was this huge sort of stratification of folks who really knew what they were doing and other folks who just felt like they were super behind. And it made me really uncomfortable. It was sort of like, the pressure is really high. I feel like your generation needs to make decisions earlier and earlier about what they want to do and how they're going to go about doing that, well before I think college is supposed to make you make those decisions. And I realized that especially for those folks who don't know what's really going on, or when they start college and don't have some of those experiences, I wanted to make an option for them to have an internship experience over the summer that gave them some of that exposure and experience, allowed them to have talking points, in future interviews like that were real solid talking points from an employment perspective with consulting, and allow them to explore things that they were interested in, like social impact, when again, maybe they didn't really know what some of that was in the first place. So that's kind of how it started. And here we are like 4 years later, and we're still going strong.
Cool. Fun story. I actually used the project we did was Yembe. It was like a big part of my story during like recruiting season.
Good.
So yeah, it definitely helped a lot. And so we know that Social Impact Scholars is huge among freshmen at NYU, and like many of our members are empowered, such as me. You have Alex Cow, he graduated. Jessica Boo, she's a sophomore right now. They were all part of All Empowered. And we're just wondering sort of like, what skills and exposures that Social Impact Scholars really offer to the students that they may not have otherwise received elsewhere?
Yep. Great question. I think to keep it really blunt, I think the big thing I want every person in the group to ask themselves by the time they leave is, what is my value? And to whom am I bringing this value? And I do think that those two questions are not questions that we ask our students enough about in college. There is plenty of what is my value, as in Professor Hansen, and how do I impart my value on students? But we don't ask the harder questions, which is to get students to think about this. And that's not like a cliche. I think the best example I can give you to sort of put some context to that is, I have students, for example, over the summer that the client wanted them to do a digital marketing campaign. And all those students came back and they're like, we have no idea how to do that. We don't have that experience and we're gonna fail at this project, right? And so I asked them, again, like very simple question, like what is your value and to whom are you bringing it? And then over time, they started to realize that the value that we have is, one, we can ask really easily. We can get 20 to 30 marketing professionals on the phone. They're willing to talk to students. They're willing to give us like their trade secrets in some ways because we're not like, competitors. we can interview them, we can synthesize and analyze their information, and then we can create some of our recommendations based on these experts. And we are able to do that, and we can like create a voice and create our own sort of strategic positioning from some of that data. And then the same point goes for the to whom am I bringing value, right? I mean, so often these students over the summer start off saying, well, obviously we want to make the client happy. And I think, you know, of course, that's the goal for any project that we're working on. But I think the bigger thing was, all right, if it's a digital marketing campaign for, you know, young women between the ages of 15 and 19, we want to think about young women between the ages of 15 and 19 and what they're going through and the things that they are looking for within the context of this particular company. And that will make the client happy. But the point is really getting to the empathy and also just really thinking about your own value and what you bring to the table and being able to look in the mirror and say, this is what I do. This is what I'm able to accomplish. And I don't think that we do that enough. And I'm excited that other organizations like EmpowerED also empower. That's kind of the point. I think these things are really important.
So we mentioned at the beginning that you have experience with developing social impact and corporate shared value programs within businesses in the private sector. So given trends towards ESG, as well as movements for racial equity, have you noticed any trends with companies incorporating social impact into their businesses?
Yeah, for sure. I think the big change for 2020, I would say, is all about perception, right? I think perception has become such an important part of the consumer and non-consumer experience about different companies, particularly with their social impact, their ESG, the way they treat their employees, the way they treat customers, or even, again, non-customers, just the general public. And I think part of that is, one, people are really angry. So people really woke up this year and said, like, enough is enough. People are just learning because a lot of the movements that have come out in 2020 are giving more people, you know, a lot more, they're waking up to some of these ideas, and people are also just home, right? They're home and they're paying more attention because they don't have a lot else to do. So I think this idea of perception is not just this like PR kind of nice thing anymore. It's really like, if a company does something that's not particularly good, particularly around ESG, again, around the way they treat other people, you get the idea, their social impact overall, people are going to not only call them out, but they're going to cancel them pretty quickly. And we've seen that even just recently with the Arlo Hotel in New York City. And, you know, they're facing litigation, they're facing serious negative press, and a ton of people are really angry about what's happening. And I think that's just one quick example that happened over a couple of days ago, where people aren't willing to, they're not going to put up with any more, I'm not going to say the swear on a podcast, but they're not. And I love that, but I think that that's something that we need to get used to. I think, again, that goes back to empowering the younger generation in particular, who has always felt these things and now are really speaking up and making a voice for older folks who are like, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't accept this type of behavior anymore. So anyway, I think perception is a big trend that we can continue to see, and it's exciting. I'm really happy that it's happening.